My name is Alara. For most of my 42 years, I've been what you might call a smoother-over of things. A keeper of the peace. I was the child who learned to read the temperature of a room before entering, to gauge the subtle shifts in my mother's sigh or the tight line of my father's mouth. I was born between a storm and a spotlight. My older brother, Daniel, was the brilliant, troubled one, and my younger sister, Chloe, was the sunshine everyone turned toward. I was the quiet space in between, the calm shoreline they all assumed would always be there to absorb the tide. I grew up in a small, sleepy town called Havenwood, a place of old oaks and quiet streets where family histories are woven into the very fabric of the community. We lived in a modest two-story house, but the heart of our family, the real seat of power, was my grandparents' home on Willow Creek Lane. It was a sprawling old Victorian with a wraparound porch and a garden my grandmother tended with a fierce, loving hand. When she passed away, she left the house to her 3 children, my mother, Eleanor, my uncle, and my father, Arthur, who wasn't her son but whom she'd loved like one. But there was a strange codicil in her will, a detail my mother always brushed off as a sentimental whim. My grandmother had also named her grandchildren as co-owners. At the time, that was just Daniel and me. Chloe hadn't been born yet. "It's just a lovely thought, dear," my mother would say, waving her hand dismissively whenever the deed came up. "It doesn't mean anything practical." I believed her. Smoothing things over, after all, was my specialty. I didn't question it. I didn't push. I just accepted it as another one of the family's gentle, harmless fictions. I carried that same quiet compliance into my own life. I married a good, steady man, Ben, whose presence is as calming as a slow, deep breath. And we had Lily. From the moment Lily was born, she was a study in quiet determination. She had my dark hair but Ben's clear, observant eyes that seemed to see everything and store it away for later. I thought, naively, that her arrival would change the family dynamic. I imagined my mother holding her, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a shared memory of when I was that small. I pictured my father, a gruff but soft-hearted man, melting at the sight of his first grandchild. But the transformation I'd hoped for never came. They were polite, of course. They called her a sweet little thing, brought over a pastel-colored receiving blanket, and asked practical questions about her feeding schedule. But there was no melting, no doting, no sense that this tiny person had fundamentally shifted the axis of their world. For them, she was a pleasant, but distant, star. For years later, my sister Chloe had her daughter, Sophie. And, suddenly, the floodgates of grandparental affection burst open. The house on Willow Creek Lane, which had been a place of polite Sunday dinners, transformed into a shrine. Photos of Sophie in the bath, Sophie with a smear of jam on her cheek, Sophie taking her first wobbly steps, appeared in silver frames on every available surface. My mother learned to knit, producing a steady stream of tiny, elaborate sweaters. My father, who had never so much as operated a digital camera, suddenly became a documentarian, creating slideshows of Sophie's every milestone. We watched it all from the sidelines. Ben and I would bring Lily to family gatherings, and she would sit quietly, observing. She was a gracious child, always polite to her grandparents, always ready with a compliment for her younger cousin's latest finger painting. She'd offer to help clear the table or show my father how to find the right channel on his television. She did all the things a good granddaughter was supposed to do, not for praise, but I think, out of a deep, innate desire for connection, for a sense of belonging in the warm circle of light that always seemed to surround Sophie. My in-laws live across the ocean in Ireland. We see them once a year if we're lucky. They adore Lily, sending her long, chatty letters and thoughtful gifts that show they pay attention to her budding interests. But they were a distant comfort. My parents, Eleanor and Arthur, were the grandparents she could see, the ones who lived just 10 minutes away. She wanted, I think, what she saw other friends have, The casual sleepovers, the inside jokes, the unconditional, easy affection of a grandparent's love. She wanted to be seen. As she grew, her quiet determination blossomed into a fierce intelligence. She poured herself into her schoolwork, not for accolades, but for the pure love of learning. She'd spend hours in her room, lost in history books or wrestling with complex math problems. I knew she was brilliant, but she wore her intelligence so humbly, it was easy for those who weren't paying attention to miss it. And my parents were not paying attention. They'd ask, "How's school, sweetheart?" their eyes already drifting toward their phones. They'd nod vaguely when I'd mention her winning a debate tournament or getting a perfect score on a physics exam. It was all filtered through a lens of polite disinterest. Meanwhile, Sophie's participation in the school's spring concert was treated like a debut at Carnegie Hall. When Lily entered her senior year of high school, something in her shifted. A quiet fire I'd always known was there began to burn brighter. She worked with an intensity that awed me, staying up late not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She was aiming high, for a university that felt like a dream, a place where her mind could truly stretch its wings. I saw her subtly trying to include her grandparents in her journey. "Grandpa might find this interesting," she'd say, showing me a paper she'd written on World War II. I wonder if Grandma saw the article about the science fair in the local paper? She wasn't seeking praise. She was offering them a window into her world, hoping they might finally choose to look through it. She graduated as valedictorian. I had told my parents about the ceremony weeks in advance, sending them the date and time, even a link to the live stream. My mother texted me the day before. "So sorry, darling, your father's not feeling up to it, and I don't want to leave him. We'll have to catch the next one." The next one. As if it were a local theater production. Lily, when I told her, just nodded. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She simply absorbed the disappointment, another small, sharp stone added to a pile she'd been carrying for years. The next day, she stood on that stage, radiant and poised, and delivered a speech about finding your own light, even when you feel like you're in the shadows. My heart ached with a pride so fierce it felt like grief. So, when my mother called me a few days later, her voice bright with a manufactured warmth, I was caught off guard. "Alara, darling," she began, the sound crackling slightly over the line. "Your father and I have been talking. We feel we haven't done enough to celebrate, and we'd like to throw a proper graduation party." I stilled, a dishcloth frozen in my hand. "A party?" "Yes, for our granddaughter. A big to-do, here at the house. The whole family, a proper celebration for all her hard work. Our granddaughter." The words hung in the air, shimmering with a possibility I hadn't let myself feel in years. My mind raced. Was this it? Was this the moment of recognition, the grand gesture to make up for all the small, quiet dismissals? They had missed the ceremony, and now, perhaps, they were consumed with regret. The thought, foolish and hopeful, took root in my heart. "Mom," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. That would be wonderful. Lily would be thrilled." "Perfect," she chirped. "We'll handle everything. Just bring yourselves next Saturday around 2. I hung up the phone, a slow, disbelieving smile spreading across my face. I walked into the living room where Lily was reading, her face illuminated by the soft afternoon light. "That was Grandma," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up, her expression neutral. "She and Grandpa want to throw you a graduation party. A big one at their house." For a moment, Lily just stared at me. Then a small, tentative smile touched her lips. It wasn't a wide, beaming grin. It was something far more precious. It was the cautious unfolding of a hope she had long kept locked away. "Really?" she whispered. "Really?" I confirmed, my own hope soaring. In that moment, watching the light return to my daughter's eyes, I let myself believe. I let myself believe that this time, finally, would be different. The week leading up to the party was filled with a gentle, humming excitement. Lily, who usually lived in jeans and worn-out sweaters, spent an afternoon searching for the perfect dress. She settled on a simple, elegant sundress the color of a summer sky. She talked about who she might invite, a favorite teacher, a couple of close friends. There was a lightness to her I hadn't seen in a long time, the quiet optimism of someone who feels they are about to be truly welcomed home. Ben and I watched her, exchanging small, hopeful glances. We didn't speak of our past reservations. We allowed ourselves to be swept up in her quiet joy. The Saturday of the party dawned bright and oppressively hot. The air was thick and still, the kind of heat that presses down on you, making every movement feel like an effort. As we drove toward Willow Creek Lane, a familiar silence descended upon the car. It was the pre-family gathering quiet, a bracing for impact that had become second nature to us. "Remember," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally cheerful, "this is a lovely gesture. Let's just enjoy it." I was speaking as much to myself as to them. We turned the corner onto their street, and I had to slow the car, my breath catching in my throat. The front lawn of my parents' house had been transformed. A large, white canopy tent stood gleaming in the sun, surrounded by dozens of white folding chairs. Clusters of balloons in shades of lavender and silver bobbed in the slight breeze. There were long tables draped in white linen, and even a professionally printed banner strung between two old oak trees. "Wow," Ben murmured from the passenger seat. "They really went all out." Lily leaned forward from the back. "This is a lot." I felt a prickle of unease. It was more extravagant than I could have imagined. It felt less like a family party and more like a wedding reception. But I pushed the feeling down, chiding myself for my cynicism. "They are making up for lost time," I told myself. Accept the gesture. We parked and made our way onto the lawn, immediately enveloped by a crowd of relatives and family friends. There were air kisses and firm handshakes, plastic cups of iced tea pressed into our hands. I saw faces I hadn't seen in years, distant cousins, old neighbors, even my uncle's ex-wife. The sheer number of people was staggering. And then I saw her, my niece Sophie, standing near the center of the crowd. She was wearing a frothy, glitter-flecked dress and a satin sash across her chest. Her hair was swept up in an elaborate cascade of curls. She was glowing, a little princess holding court. For a dizzying second, I still didn't understand. I just thought, how sweet, she's so excited for her cousin. I even gave her a warm smile. My gaze drifted past her, toward the main table under the tent. And that's when I saw the cake. It was a magnificent, three-tiered creation, frosted in a pale, shimmering pink. It was adorned with delicate sugar flowers and gold piping. A little edible graduation cap sat perched on the top. And written across the front in elegant, looping cursive were the words, "Congratulations to our only granddaughter, Sophie. Class of 2029. Time seemed to slow down. I read the words once, then twice, my mind refusing to process them. Only granddaughter. There was a framed photo beside the cake, a professional portrait of Sophie in her sparkly dress, holding a rolled-up certificate tied with a ribbon. It was her 8th grade graduation certificate. The balloons were lavender and silver, her middle school's colors. The banner I'd seen from the street read, "Soaring to New Heights." "Congrats, Sophie." The world tilted on its axis. The cheerful chatter of the party faded into a dull roar. This wasn't for Lily. It had never been for Lily. This entire, elaborate, expensive spectacle was for my niece's promotion from middle school. I turned slowly, a dreadful certainty settling in my bones. Lily was standing just behind me, perfectly still. Her face was a pale, blank canvas. She wasn't crying or shaking. She was just gone. The light I had seen in her eyes all week had been extinguished, leaving behind a vast, empty quiet. Ben stood beside her, his hand hovering near the small of her back, his jaw tight with the fury he was struggling to contain. We were ghosts at a feast meant for someone else. People smiled at us, clapped us on the shoulder. "You must be so proud," One of my mother's friends said, beaming at me. I couldn't form a response. Another guest, a cousin I barely knew, gave Lily a puzzled look. Aren't you supposed to be the guest of honor? She whispered, gesturing towards Sophie. Lily just shook her head mutely. The gift table was a mountain of brightly wrapped boxes and cards, all addressed to Sophie. We had come empty-handed, of course. Why would we bring a gift to a party we thought was for our own daughter? The oversight, our own genuine mistake, felt like a public shaming. I could feel the questioning glances, the soft murmurs. Then, my sister Chloe tapped a glass with a spoon, calling for everyone's attention. She stood, beaming, a flute of champagne in her hand. A toast, she announced. To my amazing daughter, Sophie. Middle school is such a huge achievement, and you have navigated it with such grace and brilliance. We are all so incredibly proud of you. To Sophie. A chorus of "To Sophie" echoed across the lawn. Through it all, Lily just stood there, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the tent, her posture impossibly straight. She was holding herself together with a strength that broke my heart. I waited until the toast was over, until the crowd began to move toward the buffet. I found my mother by the drink station, cheerfully telling a story to one of her friends. I waited until the friend walked away, and then I stepped forward. Mom, I said, my voice low and steady. The cake says only granddaughter. She glanced at me, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Oh, that. The bakery must have made a mistake. You know how they are. She waved her hand, a gesture of breezy dismissal. I didn't move. She sighed, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. Besides, Alara, Lily is practically an adult. This is for a child. It's a milestone. A milestone. 8th grade. As if Lily's 4 years of relentless work, her sleepless nights, her valedictorian status, were nothing more than a footnote. My father wandered over then, a paper plate laden with food in his hand. He saw my expression and frowned. What's going on? He looked at Lily, then back at me. Wait, did Lily graduate from something too? I stared at him, speechless. From what? He asked, genuinely confused. High school, I said, the words feeling like dust in my mouth. He let out a short, surprised laugh. Oh, that's right. Good for her. He patted my arm, then turned his attention back to his plate. These shrimp skewers are fantastic. You have to try one. My mother was already gone, lost in the crowd, her back to us. In that moment, I understood. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was a statement. We were not just forgotten. We were irrelevant. I looked at Ben. He met my gaze and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. I touched Lily's arm gently. Let's go home, I whispered. She turned to me, her eyes finally focusing on my face. She looked so tired. She simply nodded. We walked away. No one tried to stop us. No one called our names. It was as if we had never been there at all. We slipped out of the party as quietly as we had arrived, the sound of laughter and celebration fading behind us. As we drove away from Willow Creek Lane, away from the white tent and the silver balloons, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw my daughter's reflection. She was staring out the window, her face etched with a quiet, profound sorrow. And in the silent, humming space of the car, I made a promise to her and to myself. We are never, ever doing this again. The 3 days that followed the party were a study in quiet transformation. The initial shock gave way to a cold, hard clarity, like a landscape after an ice storm, painfully beautiful and irrevocably changed. The anger I felt wasn't a hot, roaring fire. It was a slow, deep burn in my chest, a forge reshaping years of quiet compromises into a single, unbending resolve. I wasn't grieving the loss of a relationship I thought I had. I was mourning the one I had finally admitted to myself I'd never had at all. Ben was my anchor. He didn't offer platitudes or try to manage my feelings. He simply sat with me in the quiet moments, making tea, listening. What they did, he said one evening, his voice rumbling with a contained anger, it wasn't just cruel, Alara. It was a choice. A deliberate, calculated choice. He was right. The lie wasn't in the party itself, but in the invitation, in the way my mother had used my hope for Lily as a tool to ensure our attendance at her preferred granddaughter's celebration. She had counted on my lifelong habit of smoothing things over. She had miscalculated. Lily was a marvel. She retreated into herself for a day, and I gave her the space she needed. When she emerged, she was not broken, but focused. It was as if the brutal clarity of that afternoon had severed a cord of hope she hadn't even realized was tethering her, holding her back. She started packing for college with a methodical calm, labeling boxes and making lists. She was moving forward, and I knew I had to do the same, not just for her, but for me. That's when I remembered the house. My grandmother's house. The house on Willow Creek Lane, with its wraparound porch and its garden, now the stage for our family's greatest humiliation. I remembered my name on the deed, a detail my mother had dismissed as a lovely thought. I went online and found the county's public records. And there it was, in black and white, Alara Vance, Daniel Vance. Co-owners, along with their mother, Eleanor Vance. My one-third share wasn't a sentimental fiction. It was a legal fact. I didn't want revenge. Revenge felt hot and messy, and I was done with heat. I wanted a clean, quiet severance. I wanted to reclaim the piece of my grandmother's legacy that was mine, not to hold on to it, but to let it go on my own terms. To use it to build a future for Lily, a future my parents had so carelessly dismissed. I explained it to Ben, my voice even and calm. He listened, his expression serious. When I was finished, he simply said, "What do you need me to do?" "I need to write a letter," I said. "A formal one. No emotion. Just the facts." We sat at the dining room table that night and drafted it together. It was short, professional, and utterly unambiguous. It was a formal notice of my intent to petition for a partition sale of my one-third interest in the property located at 12 Willow Creek Lane. It cited the relevant state statutes and outlined the legal process. There were no accusations, no mention of a party or a cake. The cold, legal language was more powerful than any angry tirade I could have composed. The next morning, I drove to their house. I didn't mail the letter. I wanted the delivery to be as quiet and deliberate as the decision behind it. I walked up the stone path, the memory of the party still hanging in the air like a bad smell. I slipped the plain white envelope with my mother's name typed on the front into the mail slot. There was no stamp, no return address. Just a folded piece of paper that held the weight of a lifetime of disillusionment. As I walked back to my car, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. The call came 3 days later. It was Chloe, my sister, her voice a high-pitched shriek of disbelief and fury. "What have you done?" she cried, without so much as a hello. "Mom is hysterical. She's saying you're trying to make them homeless." I took a deep breath, picturing the calm surface of a lake. "I'm selling my share of the house, Chloe. Our house. Our family home. Because of a stupid party? Are you really that petty?" "The party wasn't the cause, Chloe," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "It was the symptom. It was the moment I finally saw the truth of a sickness that's been there all along." "A sickness? What are you talking about?" "They love you." "No," I said gently. "They don't. They tolerate me. And they ignore my daughter. And I'm not willing to pretend otherwise anymore." There was a choked sob on the other end of the line. "You're tearing this family apart." "The family was already broken," I replied. "I'm just cleaning up my corner of it." I ended the call before she could respond. An hour later, my father called. His tone was different from Chloe's. It was heavy with a bewildered, wounded anger. "Alara, your mother is beside herself. I've never seen her like this. You need to take this back. Tell us it was a mistake, a joke in poor taste." "It wasn't a mistake, Dad." "But why?" he pleaded, and for the first time, I heard genuine confusion in his voice. Why would you do this to us? To your mother. This isn't about you, I said, and the words felt truer than anything I had ever said to him. This is about me. It's about Lily. It's about taking what my grandmother left for me and using it to give my daughter the future she has earned, a future you couldn't even be bothered to celebrate. There was a long silence. Then he said, his voice dropping to a low growl, "You will regret this. Family is everything. Family should be a safe harbor, Dad," I said. Not a place where you have to constantly brace for the next storm. I hung up, my hand trembling slightly. That night, Lily found me on the back porch, staring out at the garden Ben and I had so carefully cultivated. The air was cool, and the first stars were beginning to appear. She sat down in the chair beside me, not saying anything for a long time. Then, she asked quietly, "Are you okay, Mom?" I turned to look at her strong, beautiful face, so full of a wisdom beyond her years. "I think I am," I said. "I think, for the first time in a long time, I really am." She reached out and took my hand, her fingers lacing through mine. "I'm proud of you," she said. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to cry finally welled in my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release. We sat there together, mother and daughter, holding hands as the darkness gathered around us, two survivors who had finally found their own light. The quiet resolution I felt was profound, but I underestimated the lengths to which cornered people will go. I thought the letter was the final word. I was wrong. It was only the beginning of their war. Weeks bled into a tense, quiet summer. The initial flurry of angry calls ceased, replaced by a chilling silence. It was the kind of quiet that feels heavy, charged with unspoken threats. We tried to ignore it, focusing on the practicalities of Lily's departure for college. We bought extra-long twin sheets, a shower caddy, and a small, sturdy lamp for her desk. Each purchase felt like an act of defiance, a step toward a future they couldn't touch. One sweltering afternoon in late July, Lily came home from a walk, her face pale. "They were here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Who was here?" Ben asked, looking up from the newspaper. "Grandma and Grandpa. They were waiting at the end of the street." They waved me over. A cold dread coiled in my stomach. What did they want? Lily sank onto the sofa. "They wanted me to talk to you. They said you were the only one I listened to. They said you were destroying their lives, making them lose their home." Grandpa was crying. She paused, taking a shaky breath. "Grandma said that choices have consequences and that I should think very carefully about which side I was on. To use her. To ambush my daughter on the street and try to turn her into their emotional weapon. It was a new level of cruelty." "What did you say?" I asked, my voice tight. Lily looked me straight in the eye. "I told them it wasn't my decision to make and that I stood with you." Then I walked away. The pride I felt was a fierce, protective inferno. But beneath it, fear was taking root. Choices have consequences. It sounded less like a plea and more like a threat. 2 weeks later, the threat made good on its promise. A thick, official-looking envelope arrived, addressed to Lily. It bore the crest of the prestigious university she had worked so hard to get into. "It must be my final housing information," she said, tearing it open at the kitchen counter. I watched as her eyes scanned the page. I saw the color drain from her face. I saw her hand begin to tremble. Without a word, she passed the letter to me. It was from the Office of Admissions. It stated that her acceptance was being placed under immediate review, pending an investigation. An anonymous tip had been received, alleging significant omissions and potential misrepresentations on her application, specifically concerning undisclosed family assets and legal entanglements. The legalese was cold and clinical, but the meaning was brutally clear. They had done the unthinkable. They had taken their anger, their wounded pride, and they had aimed it like a weapon at the heart of my daughter's future. They had tried to poison her dream. I don't remember making a conscious decision to go there. I just remember the keys being in my hand, the car door slamming, and the familiar route to Willow Creek Lane blurring past my window. I parked haphazardly at the curb and walked up the path, my heart pounding a furious, steady rhythm against my ribs. My father opened the door before I could even knock. He looked haggard, but his eyes were defiant. My mother stood behind him in the dim hallway, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of cold justification. "You reported her," I said. There was no question in my voice. My mother stepped forward. "You left us no choice, Alara. You started this war. Did you think you could just destroy our lives and there would be no consequences?" The sheer, breathtaking audacity of her words stole my breath. "Her life? You went after her life. Her future, a future she built brick by brick, while you were too busy building a shrine to Sophie's macaroni art. This wasn't about the house, and you know it. This was about punishment. She shouldn't get to go to that fancy school, paid for with money from our house, while we end up on the street." My father spat. "That money is from Grandma's legacy to me," I shot back, my voice rising for the first time. "And you're not ending up on the street. You have your own share. You have options. But you would rather burn her future to the ground than see her succeed with something you feel entitled to." My mother let out a short, bitter laugh. "Entitled? We are entitled to respect from our children. We are entitled to peace in our old age. You took that from us." I stared at her, at the woman who had given me life, and I felt nothing but a vast, desolate emptiness. The love I'd once felt, the sense of duty, the desperate hope for her approval, it had all been burned away, leaving only ash. "You are not entitled to my daughter's sacrifice," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "You are not entitled to her light. And you will not put it out. I will burn everything to the ground before I let you do that." I turned and walked away, leaving them standing in the doorway of the house that had once been a symbol of family and was now a tombstone. The next few days were a blur of frantic phone calls. Ben and I contacted the university's admissions office. I explained the situation, the bitter family dispute, the timing of the anonymous tip. I sent them a copy of the letter I had sent my parents. The admissions counselor was sympathetic but firm. An investigation had been triggered, and it had to run its course. Lily's acceptance hung in the balance. Then, my brother Daniel called. We hadn't spoken much since the party, but he'd heard about the letter. "I got a call from Dad," he said, his voice weary. "He wants me to loan them the money to buy you out. Said they were desperate." I waited. I told him no, Daniel continued. And then I told him that what they did to Lily, that crossed a line I didn't even know existed. I told him I'm selling my share, too, Alara. "I'm with you on this." A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees washed over me. I wasn't alone. "I'll write a letter to the university as well," he added. "Confirming the timeline, confirming that this is a malicious attack. We'll fight this." And we did. We gathered documents, wrote affidavits. We laid the ugly truth of our family bare for strangers to see. It was humiliating and exhausting, but every step was fueled by the image of Lily's face as she read that letter. Finally, after 3 agonizing weeks, an email arrived from the university. The investigation was closed. The allegations were deemed unfounded and malicious. Lily's acceptance was fully reinstated. That night, the 4 of us, me, Ben, Lily, and Daniel, sat on our back porch. We didn't celebrate with champagne. We just sat in the quiet twilight, a small, battered fleet that had weathered the storm. The house on Willow Creek Lane sold a few months later. A partition sale wasn't necessary. With Daniel and me both selling, my parents were forced to agree. A young family bought it, one with 3 small children whose laughter, I hoped, would cleanse the old walls. The proceeds from my share, combined with Daniel's generous contribution from his, were more than enough to ensure Lily would graduate from her dream school debt-free. My parents took their third and bought a small, neglected bungalow on the far side of town, a place isolated by distance and their own bitterness. Chloe, caught in the crossfire, eventually distanced herself from them. unable to defend their final, desperate act. The family, as we had known it, was fractured beyond repair. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if there was another way, a softer path I could have taken. But then I think of the cake, of the casual cruelty of those words iced in pink. I think of the university letter, of a dream nearly extinguished by spite. And I know I did the only thing I could. I chose my daughter. I chose the future. I chose to stop smoothing things over and, instead, to build a new foundation, one based not on obligation or history, but on the quiet, unshakable bedrock of self-respect. It's a lonelier world, in some ways, but the air is clearer here, and for the first time, I can finally breathe.